Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Picture this. You're standing in the rugged mountains of western New Mexico, 4 miles from the Arizona border. The desert wind whistles through scattered stone foundations and around a lone chimney reaching toward an endless sky. Mine shafts dot the landscape like dark eyes staring into the earth's secrets. Ochre-stained mill ponds tell stories of fortunes won and lost. This is all that remains of Carlisle, once a thriving gold mining town that housed several thousand souls chasing the American dream. But here's what makes this ghost town extraordinary. Among those dreamers was a young Stanford graduate named Herbert Hoover, who would later become the 31st President of the United States. And in these same hills, a Chinese immigrant named Dong Phuc would forge an unlikely partnership that challenged the racist laws of his time, discovering riches that would change his life forever. Welcome to the remarkable story of Carlisle, a place where presidents were made, prejudices were overcome, and the pursuit of gold created one of the most fascinating chapters in American mining history. Our story begins in 1881, when prospectors first turned their attention to the remote mountains of Grant County, New Mexico territory. The region was part of a broader mining boom sweeping across the American West, fueled by stable gold and silver prices and expanding railroad networks that made even isolated locations accessible to ambitious miners. The landscape they encountered was unforgiving, a rugged, mountainous high desert where water was scarce, supply lines stretched thin, and extreme temperature variations tested human endurance. But the rocky outcroppings and mineral-bearing geological formations held extraordinary promise, and by 1883, the first official mining claim was filed for what would become the Carlisle Mine. As news of successful ore samples spread throughout mining circles, this remote location quickly transformed into a powerful magnet for fortune seekers from across the nation. The federal government recognized the growing settlement's importance by establishing a post office in 1884, providing vital mail service that connected this isolated community to the outside world for 12 crucial years until economic decline forced its closure in 1896. At its peak, Carlisle housed several thousand residents representing a remarkable cross-section of American society. Miners and prospectors worked alongside engineers and claim holders, creating a complex social hierarchy based on skill, investment, and success. Merchants supplied everything from basic necessities to specialized mining equipment, while doctors, lawyers, and assayers provided essential professional services. Saloon keepers and gamblers created the entertainment infrastructure that defined mining camp culture throughout the American West. The town's character was unmistakably that of a boom town, rough, transient, and undeniably lusty. Multiple saloons served not just as drinking establishments but as informal community centers where business deals were struck, news was shared, and the social fabric of the community was woven together. By 1886, Carlisle's mining operations had progressed far beyond simple ore extraction. 3 miles from the main settlement, in an area specifically designated as East Camp, construction began on an impressive 5-stamp mill, a sophisticated ore processing facility that represented the pinnacle of 1880s mining technology. This wasn't merely equipment acquisition. It was a bold statement of faith in the district's long-term economic viability and mineral wealth. The mill's completion marked a crucial turning point for the entire community. On December 17, 1886, the entire town gathered to celebrate the facility's grand inauguration in what became one of Carlisle's most memorable community events. Residents arrived by every conceivable method of transportation: wagons loaded with families and supplies, carriages carrying the more affluent citizens, individual horseback riders, and locals who simply walked to join the celebration. The festivities were remarkably generous by any standard. Premium cigars were distributed to the men, while apple cider, fine wine, and quality hard liquor flowed freely throughout the gathering. The inclusion of women in this predominantly male environment was particularly notable, especially when a distinguished female guest was selected for the ceremonial honor of officially activating the mill's operations. Among the hundreds of workers who made Carlisle their temporary home during these prosperous boom years was a young Stanford University graduate who would later fundamentally change the course of American history. In 1898, exactly 3 years after completing his comprehensive engineering degree, 24-year-old Herbert Hoover arrived in Carlisle to serve as assistant superintendent of the extensive Steeple Rock mining operations. Hoover established living arrangements with mine superintendent P.H. McDermott, a practical arrangement that provided both comfortable accommodation and invaluable professional mentorship. Under McDermott's experienced guidance, the future president learned the complex practical realities of mining management, essential skills involving labor relations, resource allocation, and operational efficiency that would prove invaluable throughout his later distinguished career in humanitarian work and national politics. Perhaps the most remarkable and inspiring story to emerge from Carlisle's colorful history involves Chinese immigrant Dong Phuc, whose extraordinary experience perfectly illustrates both the harsh realities of 19th-century racial discrimination and the transformative power of human partnerships to overcome seemingly insurmountable legal and social obstacles. Dong Phuc initially earned his living as a hard-working waiter in a Chinese-owned restaurant that served the diverse mining community. When English corporation representatives abruptly ordered the mine and mill permanently closed, he faced the same devastating economic crisis as hundreds of other suddenly unemployed workers. But unlike many others who simply departed for opportunities elsewhere, Dong Phuc made the bold decision to try his hand at independent prospecting, courageously partnering with fellow Chinese immigrants Dong Yue and Li Shu. Despite their extremely limited supplies and basic equipment, the three determined men succeeded spectacularly where many experienced prospectors had failed completely. Within just a few weeks of beginning their systematic exploration efforts, they discovered a remarkably high-value mineral deposit that showed unmistakable signs of significant commercial potential. There was just one seemingly insurmountable problem. As Chinese immigrants operating within a discriminatory legal framework, they were explicitly prohibited from filing official mining claims under the harsh alien land laws that systematically excluded them from property ownership and economic participation. This is precisely where P.H. McDermott, the same honorable man who had mentored future President Herbert Hoover, demonstrated the extraordinary personal character that would define his lasting legacy. When Dong Phuc approached him with a carefully considered partnership proposal, McDermott immediately agreed to file the official legal claim as the recognized owner while generously allowing Dong Phuc to retain complete actual mining and operational control. This unprecedented arrangement required extraordinary mutual trust on both sides. Dong Phuc had to completely believe that McDermott would faithfully honor their gentleman's agreement despite having absolutely no legal recourse if he was betrayed. McDermott had to willingly risk his hard-earned reputation and professional standing on a partnership that directly challenged the prevailing racial attitudes of his time. The partnership's remarkable success was nearly cut short by a terrifying mining accident. While sinking a 12-foot vertical shaft, Dong Phuc was carefully preparing dynamite charges when a crucial ladder rung suddenly broke during his routine ascent to safety. The devastating fall broke his ankle, but the real mortal danger came from the burning fuse he couldn't extinguish. With explosion imminent and no functional ladder, Dong Phuc desperately clawed up the shaft walls, reaching the surface mere moments before the dynamite detonated. McDermott immediately arranged emergency transport to Lordsburg, where Dr. Woods assessed the severe foot trauma and recommended amputation as the safest treatment option. Dong Phuc's passionate protest led to a medical compromise. Dr. Woods agreed to attempt foot preservation despite significantly higher risk. While receiving conventional Western medical care, Dong Phuc supplemented his treatment by drinking water mixed with mineral specimens from his own mine, combining traditional Chinese healing practices with modern medicine. This innovative approach led to rapid recovery that exceeded all medical expectations, allowing him to avoid amputation while maintaining basic mobility, though he would walk with a permanent limp. When a San Francisco businessman recognized the mine's exceptional potential and made a substantial purchase offer, McDermott proved absolutely worthy of the trust placed in him. He ensured Dong Phuc received his complete agreed-upon share of profits, and the three Chinese partners returned to China as wealthy men, having achieved the American dream through courage, determination, and unprecedented cross-cultural partnership. In the end, Carlisle was more than just a mining town. It was a proving ground for American ideals, where futures were forged not just in gold and silver, but in the more precious metals of human character and mutual respect. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, 150 miles of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth stretching before you. The sun beats down mercilessly. There's no water for miles, and scattered along the trail ahead are crude stone markers, makeshift graves of the hundreds who never made it out alive. This is the Camino del Diablo, the road of death, where fortune seekers went to die in pursuit of gold. But here's the incredible part. Right alongside this highway to hell, one of Arizona's most remarkable mining towns would rise from the desert floor. A place where ingenious engineering, human determination, and pure luck converge to create something extraordinary in one of the most hostile environments imaginable. This is the story of Fortuna, a town that shouldn't have existed, built by people who refused to accept the impossible. The Camino del Diablo wasn't just a colorful name. It was a 150-mile stretch of absolute hell cutting through the Sonoran Desert between Mexico and California. This trail earned its sinister reputation during two catastrophic periods that left the desert floor littered with human remains. The first disaster came in 1849, when gold fever gripped the nation, and thousands of prospectors decided to take what they thought was a shortcut to the California gold fields. These 49ers arrived completely unprepared for what awaited them. They brought insufficient water, inadequate supplies, and no understanding of desert survival. The Sonoran Desert showed no mercy. The death toll was staggering. Entire expeditions vanished into the desert, their bones scattered by the wind. Those lucky enough to survive left crude stone markers wherever they buried their companions, a grim breadcrumb trail of human tragedy stretching across the wasteland. Incredibly, people didn't learn their lesson. In 1860, news of gold discoveries along the Colorado River triggered another wave of death. This time, primarily Mexican nationals attempted the crossing, driven by economic desperation. The desert claimed them just as efficiently as it had the American gold rushers 11 years earlier. By the time the killing stopped, The Camino del Diablo had earned its reputation as one of the most dangerous places in North America. Travelers began avoiding it entirely, seeking safer routes even if they took longer. The Road of Death had lived up to its name. For decades after these tragedies, prospectors continued to pass through this deadly region, but they were so focused on survival that they missed something incredible right under their noses. About 45 miles southeast of Yuma, nestled in the rugged Gila Mountains, a gold outcrop sat exposed and visible to anyone who bothered to look. Think about that. Experienced miners, men who could spot gold-bearing quartz from 100 yards away, walked right past a fortune because they were too busy trying not to die. The harsh environment that made the Camino del Diablo so deadly also acted as perfect camouflage for one of Arizona's richest gold deposits. This cosmic game of hide-and-seek finally ended on December 22, 1894, when three prospectors, Charles W. Thomas, Laurent Albert, and William H. Holbert, finally noticed what so many others had missed. Unlike desperate travelers of previous decades, these men were conducting a systematic survey, taking time to actually examine the geology rather than just trying to survive. What they found was extraordinary: a rich gold vein that had been waiting patiently for discovery, while hundreds of fortune seekers died just miles away, never knowing they were walking past the very treasure they sought. The three discoverers understood they had found something special, but they also understood their limitations. Mining gold in one of the most remote and hostile locations in North America would require more than enthusiasm and picks. It would require serious capital, advanced engineering, and business expertise they didn't possess. Enter Charles D. Lane, a mining investor from Angels Camp, California. Lane came from the heart of gold country, where the California gold rush had taught miners hard lessons about turning discoveries into profitable operations. In 1896, just 2 years after discovery, Lane purchased the claim and immediately set about transforming it from a promising hole in the ground into a legitimate mining enterprise. Lane incorporated the La Fortuna Gold Mining and Milling Company, creating a corporate structure that could attract serious investment and organize large-scale operations. This wasn't going to be some pick-and-shovel operation run by optimistic prospectors. This was going to be industrial mining on a scale the desert had never seen. But Lane faced the same problem that had challenged every human who had ever set foot in this wasteland: water. You can't run a mining operation without water, and you definitely can't sustain a community of workers without it. The nearest reliable water source was the Gila River, miles away from the mine site. What happened next represents one of the most remarkable feats of frontier engineering in American history. Lane and his team installed a massive 100-horsepower pumping system, an absolute monster of a machine for its time, and constructed a pipeline from the Gila River to the mine site. To put this in perspective, they were building industrial infrastructure in a place where people regularly died just from trying to walk through. They had to transport heavy machinery, construction materials, and skilled workers into the middle of nowhere, then assemble and operate complex equipment in temperatures that could kill. The pumping system didn't just solve the water problem, it transformed the entire nature of what was possible in this environment. Suddenly, the mine site had not just enough water for basic survival, but enough for industrial-scale mining operations. They could run steam engines, operate hydraulic equipment, and support a substantial workforce. With the water problem solved, Lane built a 20-stamp mill directly at the mine site. This wasn't some small-scale crushing operation. This was serious industrial equipment capable of processing tons of ore per day. Building it on-site rather than hauling raw ore to a distant mill showed they expected to extract gold for years to come. With infrastructure in place and operations running, something remarkable began to happen. People started showing up, not just miners, but all the people who make a mining camp into a real community. By the time operations hit full swing, Fortuna employed between 80 and 100 workers, extraordinary for such a remote location. The town that grew up around the mill was a fascinating mixture of permanent and temporary construction. Some residents built substantial adobe houses using local materials, while others lived in tents or improvised shelters. At the center was a hotel that served both residents and visitors, providing good meals that became famous throughout the region. Multiple saloons sprang up, serving dual purposes: entertainment and social gathering spaces. The federal government took notice. On September 30th, 1896, Fortuna received its own post office, officially designating it as a legitimate settlement worthy of federal postal service. This represented the government's recognition that a real, permanent community had emerged in one of the most unlikely places imaginable. For nearly a decade, Fortuna defied every expectation about what was possible in such a hostile environment. The town had regular stagecoach service connecting it to Blaisdell Station on the Southern Pacific Railroad, providing reliable transportation for passengers and freight. Residents could receive supplies, visitors, and news from the outside world regularly. The mining operations continued producing significant quantities of gold. The 20-stamp mill ran constantly, processing tons of ore and extracting the precious metal that made everything else possible. Workers developed expertise in desert mining techniques, learning to work in extreme heat and manage constant challenges of operating industrial equipment in a hostile environment. Most remarkably, Fortuna proved that with enough determination, engineering skill, and capital investment, humans could create thriving communities anywhere. The same desert that had killed hundreds of travelers now supported a thriving town living relatively comfortable lives. Nothing lasts forever, especially not in the desert. By 1904, it was clear that Fortuna's golden age was ending. The exact reasons aren't entirely clear. It might have been ore depletion, changing market conditions, or simply the enormous costs of maintaining complex operations in such a remote location. The end came relatively quickly. The post office shuttered on November 30th, 1904, after 8 years and 2 months of operation. The La Fortuna Gold Mining and Milling Company scaled back operations dramatically, reducing from a workforce of 80 to 100 to a skeleton crew maintaining intermittent mining activities. For the next 20 years, Fortuna existed in limbo, not quite abandoned but no longer the thriving community it had once been. Small-scale mining continued sporadically, suggesting gold remained in the ground but not in quantities justifying massive infrastructure investments. Eventually, even minimal operations ceased. The powerful pumping system fell silent, the mill stopped crushing ore, and the pipeline from the Gila River was abandoned. Without industrial activity that had sustained it, the town simply evaporated back into the desert that had tried so hard to prevent its existence in the first place. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Picture this. It's the mid-1860s, and you're riding through the harsh Arizona desert 20 miles east of what would become Yuma. The scorching sun beats down mercilessly as you follow the meandering path of the Gila River. Suddenly, you crest a small rise and see something that stops you dead in your tracks. 3 lonely chimneys standing like tombstones against the desert sky. Welcome to Southwest Desert. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're diving into the incredible tale of Gila City, a settlement that went from non-existent to a thriving metropolis of 1,200 souls and back to nothing but ruins, all in just 7 years. This is a story of dreams, gold fever, crushing disappointment, and the raw power of nature itself. Our story begins in early 1858, when a solitary prospector named Jacob Snively was working his way along the banks of the Gila River. Snively was one of countless fortune seekers shaped by California's legendary gold rush, but unlike many content to chase played-out claims in overcrowded camps, he had his eyes fixed on the largely unexplored Arizona territory. On what seemed like just another day of backbreaking labor, Snively's pan revealed something that would change history for this remote stretch of desert. Glittering in the black sand were unmistakable flakes, and nuggets of what experienced miners would later describe as rich placer gold. The Gila River's seasonal floods had been working as nature's own mining operation for millennia, concentrating precious metal in the gravel bars along its banks. This wasn't gold locked away in hard rock requiring expensive equipment. This was alluvial gold, loose particles that any man with a pan, a rocker, and determination could potentially extract. Word of Snively's discovery leaked out gradually through informal networks connecting mining camps throughout the Southwest, eventually reaching California's mining communities and triggering an extraordinary migration eastward. What happened next was breathtaking in its speed. The settlement mushroomed seemingly overnight, appearing as if by magic where weeks before there had been nothing but desert silence. The location was perfect, situated directly on the Gila River, providing essential water access for placer mining, with flat terrain offering space for the sprawling, chaotic development that frontier boom towns. By December 24, 1858, Christmas Eve, the U.S. Postal Service formally established Gila City as an official post office, recognizing a community substantial enough to warrant federal attention. The architectural evolution told the story of a settlement expecting to stay. Canvas tents gave way to wooden shanties, which were eventually replaced by adobe houses for the most optimistic residents. At its peak, Gila City housed approximately 1,200 souls, making it one of the larger settlements in sparsely populated Arizona territory. This wasn't just a camp full of muddy miners. The community developed a sophisticated economic ecosystem including merchants, service providers, and skilled craftsmen. The economic data from Gila City's heyday reads like a prospector's wildest dreams. Individual miners reported daily earnings ranging from $30 to $125, figures that were absolutely staggering in 1858 to 1860 America, when typical laborers in eastern cities might expect to earn $1 a day if they were lucky. For those lacking skills or equipment to prospect independently, Gila City offered wage labor at $3 per day plus room and board, triple what working men could expect anywhere else in the country. The demand for labor was so intense that employers couldn't afford to be picky about experience. The mining operations themselves were systematic and intensive. Every accessible stretch of riverbank, every gulch that might have concentrated gold-bearing sediment was explored and exploited. Miners turned the landscape inside out, using whatever tools they could improvise when proper equipment wasn't available. What made Gila City particularly attractive was the low barrier to entry. Unlike hard rock mining requiring significant capital investment, placer mining could be attempted by anyone with basic tools and willingness to work. The river had already done the hard work of breaking gold free from its original matrix. The business district was remarkably comprehensive for such an isolated location, with merchants providing about everything from basic necessities to luxury items. However, certain civic institutions were notably absent. No jail was ever built and no church established, indicating that economic priorities far outweighed social or spiritual concerns in this transient community. Like all gold rush stories, Gila City contained the seeds of its own destruction. The very accessibility that made placer mining so attractive also meant deposits could be exhausted relatively quickly. The transition from boom to bust wasn't immediately obvious. Merchants continued reporting thriving business, and miners still found enough gold to justify their presence. But experienced prospectors began noticing subtle changes. Claims that had produced consistently good returns started yielding less. Each miner was essentially making individual calculations about whether to stay or move on. Some held on longer, convinced one more good day would compensate for disappointing ones. Others, perhaps more realistic, began quietly making plans to try their luck elsewhere. The factor that ultimately doomed Gila City wasn't just local gold exhaustion, but new opportunities elsewhere. In 1862, fresh gold discoveries were reported at La Paz on the Colorado River, offering the irresistible combination of untapped mineral wealth and easier transportation access. The migration from Gila City to La Paz represented the mobile, opportunistic mindset characterizing frontier mining communities. These weren't people with deep roots. They were professional fortune seekers viewing geographic locations as temporary bases for extracting wealth rather than permanent homes. The exodus wasn't sudden or dramatic. Population drained away gradually as individual miners and families made personal decisions to seek better prospects. First miners left, reducing demand for goods and services. Then merchants and service providers followed, unable to sustain businesses with diminished customer bases. As if economic collapse wasn't enough, nature seemed determined to write Gila City's final chapter. In 1862, the same year many residents were abandoning the settlement, catastrophic flooding along the Gila River swept through the community's remnants with devastating force. The timing couldn't have been worse for recovery hopes. A thriving community might have rebuilt after such destruction, but Gila City was already economically hollowed out. The flood simply delivered the coup de grace to a dying community, nearly obliterating remaining structures and serving as a final, unmistakable message that their time was over. By the mid-1860s, just 7 years after Snively's discovery, Gila City had been reduced to 3 chimneys standing alone in the desert. These solitary sentinels of fired brick and stone represented all that remained of a community that had once housed over 1,000 people and generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in mineral wealth. The selective survival of these chimneys reflected frontier construction realities, while canvas tents and wooden shanties were quickly destroyed, and adobe buildings eventually succumbed to elements. Fired brick chimneys possessed durability to outlast the communities they once served. Gila City represents far more than just another failed mining venture. It's a perfect microcosm of boom and bust cycles characterizing American frontier development, particularly in the arid Southwest where communities depended entirely on single extractive industries. The settlement's brief existence illustrates the remarkable mobility and adaptability frontier life required. The same people who could build a functioning town from nothing in months were equally capable of abandoning their investment when circumstances changed. This flexibility was both strength and weakness, enabling rapid response to opportunities while preventing the stability necessary for long-term growth. Today, visiting Gila City's former site reveals little evidence of the dreams and dramas that played out there. The Gila River continues its ancient journey, indifferent to human hopes that once clustered along its banks. The desert has reclaimed most traces, leaving only scattered artifacts to mark where 1,200 people once called this remote corner home. The next time you see an abandoned building or ghost town marker along a western highway, remember Gila City and the thousands who bet their futures on Arizona desert gold. Their story is our story, a chapter in the ongoing American narrative of risk, reward, and the eternal search for something better just over the next horizon. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape of Death Valley, where summer temperatures regularly soar above 120 degrees and water is scarce as gold itself, there once stood a town called Skidoo. Its story begins not with careful planning but with a mistake, a fateful wrong turn in a rare Death Valley fog. But before diving into those beginnings, listeners should know how this town's story ends, because sometimes the end reveals more about a place than its beginning. In April 1908, a man known locally as Hooch Simpson attempted to rob the Skidoo Bank on a quiet Sunday morning. When he failed, he returned 3 hours later with a gun and murdered Jim Arnold, a beloved resident. The sheriff arrested Simpson, but by Wednesday night the citizens of Skidoo had taken matters into their own hands. An armed mob broke into the jail, dragged Simpson out, and hanged him from a telephone pole. Frontier justice was common in these remote mining towns, but what happened next was extraordinary even by those standards. When a Los Angeles Herald reporter arrived on Friday wanting photographs of the hanging, the obliging citizens of Skidoo actually exhumed Simpson's body and hanged it again, just for the photo opportunity. The coroner's official finding was simply death by strangulation by persons unknown. This macabre episode speaks volumes about life in Skidoo, a place so removed from civilization that it created its own rules, its own justice, and apparently its own photo ops. But to understand how things reached this point, we must return to the town's unusual origins. The year was 1906 when two prospectors, Harry Ramsey and a one-eyed man known only as Thompson, found themselves disoriented in an unusual fog. They were heading for a place called Harrisburg, about 6 miles south, but their navigational error led them to a massive gold deposit instead. Their accidental discovery would soon transform this empty stretch of the Panamint Range into a bustling town. Word of their find quickly reached Bob Montgomery, a mining magnate from nearby Rhyolite. Recognizing the potential, Montgomery reportedly paid $100,000 in cash, equivalent to over $3 million today, for several claims in the area. This substantial investment acted as a catalyst, and by mid-1906, prospectors and miners were flooding into this remote corner of Death Valley. The settlement that formed wasn't in an easily accessible location. Perched at the top of the Panamint Range, it was described poetically as where the western wall of Death Valley fades off into thin air. More precisely, it sat about 27 miles from Stovepipe Wells Village, 7 miles east and north of the Emigrant Canyon-Trona Road, and 10.5 miles south of the junction with State Route 190. This inaccessibility led to the town's peculiar name. 23 Skidoo was popular slang at the time, meaning something like "get out of here" or "scram." But for this mining camp, the 23 had practical significance. The nearest water source was exactly 23 miles away, toward Telescope Peak. Mining without water is impossible, and hauling water that distance over rugged mountain terrain would have made the operation impractical. Montgomery's financial resources solved this seemingly insurmountable problem. He installed an 8-inch pipeline all the way from Telescope Peak to the camp, an extraordinary engineering achievement for 1906. With that vital infrastructure in place, Skidoo was ready to boom. By late 1906, Skidoo was transforming from a collection of tents and claims into a proper town. Saloons and stores were rapidly constructed. Stage routes for mail and express deliveries were established from both east and west, and in October the settlement received official recognition with its own post office. Many residents actually migrated from nearby Harrisburg, which was being abandoned as Skidoo grew. By spring 1907, the population exceeded 500 people. The town now boasted a school for its children, a weekly newspaper called the Skidoo News, telephone service extended from Rhyolite, and telegraph connections linking the remote community to the wider world. The amenities continued to multiply. Multiple stores offered goods that had to be hauled in over difficult terrain. Various saloons provided entertainment and social spaces. A bank opened to handle the increasing wealth flowing from the mines. And, as was common in mining towns of that era, a red light district emerged on the outskirts. Real estate speculation drove property values to remarkable heights. Choice lots were selling for up to $1,000, approximately $30,000 in today's money. This was truly extraordinary for a location that had been unmarked wilderness just 1 year earlier. But gold rush towns often burn bright and fast, and Skidoo was no exception. By late 1907, just 18 months after its founding, the decline had begun. Two main factors were at play. First, a nationwide financial panic hit in late 1907, drying up investment. Second, the promotion phase was over. The easy money had been made selling claims and lots. In 1908, the Skidoo Mines Company acquired the main operations, transforming Skidoo from a freewheeling boomtown into what was essentially a company town. This was when the infamous Simpson incident occurred, marking a turning point in the town's history and creating the story that would long outlive the town itself. Despite the decline from its boom days, mining operations in Skidoo continued productively for years. The total gold production exceeded 1.5 million, close to 50 million in today's dollars. The operation included a 15-stamp mill and a cyanide plant for treating the ore, representing significant industrial development in this remote location. The mines kept producing until 1917, when the post office finally closed, typically considered the official end of a town's existence in that era. But the story didn't end there completely. There were periodic revivals with small-scale operations in later years. In the late 1930s, there was even a 25-ton cyanide plant operating in nearby Emigrant Canyon, processing ore from the old Skidoo mines. Today, visitors to the Skidoo site will find very little remaining. No intact buildings have survived the harsh Death Valley elements, just a few collapsed structures, the ruins of the wind-damaged stamp mill, some mine portals, and several graves at the Skidoo mine site, west and above the town's former location. It's difficult to imagine that this silent, windswept spot once housed 500 souls, with all their dreams, schemes, triumphs, and tragedies. Yet the evidence of their presence remains in the scattered ruins and in the stories passed down through the decades. Skidoo's greatest technical achievement was undoubtedly that remarkable water pipeline. Building an 8-inch pipe over 23 miles of mountainous terrain in 1906 was an engineering feat that demonstrated both the determination of the miners and the financial commitment of their backers. Without that water, there would have been no Skidoo. It shows how much infrastructure had to be created from scratch in these remote locations. These weren't just camps. They were instant communities that had to solve complex logistical problems. The isolation of Skidoo cannot be overstated. The nearest established settlements were miles away over difficult terrain. News traveled by stagecoach or telegraph. Supply runs would have been major expeditions. In many ways, these mining towns were like islands. They had to be largely self-sufficient while also maintaining vital connections to the outside world to sell their gold and bring in necessities. Yet despite these challenges, for a brief moment, Skidoo thrived. It had everything a proper town needed: governance, commerce, education, communication, entertainment. That's what makes these ghost towns so fascinating. They remind us how quickly human settlements can appear and disappear, how tenuous our grip on permanence really is. Especially when that settlement is built on a non-renewable resource like gold. Once the gold ran out or became too expensive to extract, the economic reason for Skidoo's existence vanished. The people moved on, buildings were abandoned or dismantled for materials, and nature began the slow process of reclaiming the site. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.